Political approach to ecological civilization. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you to the entire anthropology department and everyone present today. It's always nice to go at the end of the day because I get to take in everybody else's presentation and learn from everybody. I'm very grateful for that. I'm going to speak a little bit about what the British mathematician and philosopher Alfred North Whitehead might have to say to Karl Marx. I am a grateful student of Marx. This critique is in an effort to move Marx in more of the world-ecological direction that many of you are attempting as well. So my title, Whitehead and Marx, A Cosmopolitical Approach to Ecological Civilization, has some words in there that might be problematic. I just want to briefly unpack them. Cosmopolitics, first of all, is an effort on the part of several thinkers, the Belgian philosopher of science and practicing which Isabel Stengers, the sociologist of science Bruno Latour, the feminist philosopher of science Donna Haraway. They're all working together to develop this way of thinking called cosmopolitics. That's an attempt to think beyond the modern human nature divide or society nature divide, beyond the modern fact-value divide, or what Alfred North Whitehead, who influenced all three of these thinkers, called the bifurcation of nature. Whitehead, of course, is a pan-experientialist or a pan-psychist, or if you want, a kind of attenuated animist. Is anyone familiar with Whitehead's thought here today? Anyone read Whitehead before? A little bit? Okay. I can't get into all the details. A lot of the things I'm going to say might sound really weird. I'm hoping that you might be inspired to look deeper into Whitehead's thought to make sense of how he says some of these things. So this other term, civilization, obviously this term can be problematized because of its history of use to exclude people, savages, barbarians, etc. Usually it's thought of as a Eurocentric term. I'm getting this term, ecological civilization, actually from China. The Chinese Communist Party has written this into its project for the next decades to create an ecological civilization. And there are actually something like 35 graduate programs focused on Whitehead's thought in China. More people are reading Whitehead in China than in the English-speaking world or in Europe, strangely enough. There are a lot of people in China, so it's not that difficult to do, I guess. So, what does Whitehead mean by civilized? He's coming of age in the middle of the height of the British Empire. When he started doing philosophy in the second half of his life, he moved to the United States. The British Empire was breaking apart at that point. But still, if we're going to situate Whitehead in his historical context, we have to acknowledge that there are some problematic assumptions that he makes. But when he talks about civilization, one of the examples that he uses is observing this mother squirrel one summer who was tending to some of her children in the nest. And for the first time, he sees this mother squirrel take her children out of the nest. And he observes this mother running back and forth to the nest and seemingly frantic, as though she lost one of her children. And Whitehead, sees that there are 3 little baby squirrels, and what he interprets this frantic mother to be struggling with is the fact that she never saw this group of her babies outside of the nest before, and she thinks she's missing one because she can't count. She doesn't know that there were always 3. And so she sees them outside the nest in different configurations. The squirrel doesn't have the abstract mental capacity to count. So Whitehead says, I quote him, he says, "At least some squirrels have not yet passed to the level of civilization or achieved the level of civilization." And for him, in this sense, civilization has to do with the conscious recognition of and the capacity to participate in the power of ideas or of abstractions, and the recognition that ideas, some of Whitehead's favorite ideas are freedom and love, to make history and to shape history. What makes a civilized being for Whitehead is the conscious recognition and participation in the power of ideas to shape history. I would like to make this as inclusive an understanding of what it means to be civilized as we can. On the other hand, maybe this word is just too tarnished and we just throw it out. You can use another word, that's fine too. So given this, though, Whitehead's not an idealist. It's important to point out. He's not an idealist, he's not a materialist, he's a pan-experientialist, he's a pan-psychist, which I think is a mediating, in good dialectical fashion, I would say, panpsychism is the sublation of the overcoming of the dualism between materialism and idealism. Whitehead would admit that ideas only have power when the material and historical conditions are ripe, when a habitat can support their aggression. And he would criticize Marx for having too anthropocentric an idea of ideas. Because ideas are not just conjured up in human heads, they're not just scratched onto paper pages by human hands. Whitehead invites us to expand our conception of ideas so that we can sense, for example, that the idea of the good generates or participates in generating the light and the warmth of the sun, no less than the nuclear reactions and electromagnetic radiation of the physicists, and similarly that the idea of beauty is at work in the evolution of peacocks and butterflies and roses, not just in Beethoven's Ninth or in the Mona Lisa. Whitehead says that, one of his most famous lines, he says, "We find ourselves in a buzzing world amid a democracy of fellow creatures." Democracy then, just like ideas, it's not just a human invention. He wants to conceive democracy ontologically. He says the basis of democracy is the common fact of value experience, as constituting the essential nature of each pulsation of actuality. Everything has some value for itself, for others, and for the whole. Every bacterium in the soil, every bee in the hive, every human being in society, every star in the galaxy has value for itself, for others, and for the whole. This is pan-experientialism for Whitehead. It's not just that the bacteria and the bumblebees, that they have value, because we could just say, well, humans attribute that value to them. No, they are value makers, value creators themselves. And this is where his critique of Marx comes in, though in a conversation with a journalist, Lucian Price, in 1944, Whitehead was asked if the prior half-century or so had any political thinkers who were as daring and original as those who inaugurated the new relativistic and quantum revolutions in physics, and he said, there's Marx, of course, though I cannot speak of him with any confidence. But he goes on to say that Marx is the prophet of the Proletarian revolution, and he points out something significant, I think for our conference in particular. He points to the singular relevance of the fact that the first practical effectuation of Marx's ideas in Soviet Russia under Lenin occurred in a society dominated by farmers. So I see him pointing here to the relevance of food sovereignty as a form of resistance to capitalism. So this question, though, when we bring Whitehead and Marx into conversation with one another, is what is value and how is it created? Like most modern thinkers, Marx, like John Locke before him, and like Friedrich Hayek after him, thinks of value as something that human beings create. Human labor applied to nature creates value. We can talk about the difference between use value and exchange value, objective or subjective value, but ultimately it's an anthropocentric view of value. Marx would say that value is a social relation, and here again for Whitehead, Whitehead would never oppose nature and society. Whitehead sees nature itself as already social. Nature is a democracy of fellow creatures, achieving and creating values. Human beings, like all other creatures, are productive of values, but we're not the only species that is capable of this. So Bruno Latour has been critical of Marxism for its, what he thinks is an idealistic form of materialism that misses or downplays or ignores the activity or the agency of non-human beings. Latour would say that Marx was fully modern in his commitment to what Latour refers to as the double task of emancipation and domination, where the emancipatory task, and this is in Latour's book, We Have Never Been Modern, the emancipatory task was political, that is to end the exploitation of humans by humans, and the task of domination was techno-scientific, to become masters of nature. So Marx was fully on board with the idea that human society should master nature to benefit human beings. And in all of modern thought, there's this opposition between free human beings and a deterministic nature. We define the freedom of human beings in opposition to a deterministic, mechanistic nature, and it's by dominating nature that we achieve our freedom. This is the modern story, and it's ending in an ecological catastrophe, right? So the problem then is to find a way to conceive of human freedom differently, to conceive of human freedom such that human-earth relations, that our achievement of human freedom does not require the domination of nature. And the scene that Latour paints for us is one wherein, he writes a lot about Gaia nowadays. And whereas the modern project was to conceive of the Earth as a globe, right, it's easily mapped and therefore easily dominated and exploited, Latour is asking us to turn that inside out, to become, we humans, englobed inside of the Earth, inhabited, in a sense, by the Earth, enclosed within it, trapped in a way. There's no escape, despite Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk's idea that we're going to go colonize space. Latour thinks that that's nonsense, that there is no other place that can sustain life. So we're trapped here. And so how do we conceive then of human freedom? Human beings are not as free, I propose, and drawing on Whitehead here, human beings are not as free and teleological as moderns have imagined, and nor is nature as dumb and deterministic. Marx has this famous passage where he distinguishes the worst human architect from the best honeybee, and he says, the former, the human architect, designs his buildings in advance, ideally in his mind or her mind, before then constructing them in fact. Whereas, apparently honeybees are just automatons blindly obeying instincts when they build their hives, right? But I don't think that's how bee creativity works. I don't think that's how human creativity works either. There's a great architect named Christopher Alexander. He used to teach at UC Berkeley across the bay, who talked about medieval cathedrals and the way that they were generated, not designed in advance ideally, and then just implemented, but rather generated over the course of generations in an organic way. That there's purpose involved. Obviously, they're building cathedrals for a purpose, religious purposes, but they're assembled in a very creative way that isn't just, there's not one architect in advance who had the whole thing planned out. Materials that are available are changing, people are dying, new people are joining the project. The beautiful cathedrals that we cherish are beautiful because of the organic way in which they were constructed, and the image of a human architect designing it in advance and just implementing the plan in this simplistic way that Marx is describing isn't how beauty is created. Buildings that are designed like that tend to be designed for the purpose of making money rather than for living. So they're dead structures. and Christopher Alexander beautifully about this. So the point here is that we need to think of human creativity in a different way so that there's a continuity between what bees are doing and what human builders are doing. Human freedom and human creativity is not an anomaly in the universe. It's an extremely potent form of something that has been present from the beginning. I'm out of time. I hope we can continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.